Well, hello there. This is Craig Hane or Dr. Dell, and this video is going to be about math proves that God exists. Now, if you're not too familiar with science, the bottom half of this PDF that you will have that attached to this video is all about historical perspective of science. It's a short history of science. I've done a video on that, about a 20-minute video. And so you might want to watch that video first before you watch this if science is really something you don't know very much about. However, that said, let's get into this. Now, the situation today is I believe that an awful lot of young people are told by a lot of different scientists that, hey, science proves that God does not exist. And first of all, let me talk about how I would even define the word God. I believe that God is some kind of, I'll call it a being that's probably beyond our understanding, but it's responsible for all life in some sense of the word. Now, let me give you an analogy. A young child knows his or her mother in many ways and has a very intimate relationship with his or her mother. And the mother, if she's a good mother, gives the child what is needed for the child's well-being. Now, sometimes the child likes what the mother gives it, sometimes not. Because after all, when you are raising a child and educating them, sometimes you have to do things or have them do things that are painful, unpleasant, or whatever they don't like. And that's what it's all about. Now, what we all hope is that as this child grows older and older, the child's going to begin to understand the mother better and more. The relationship's going to get stronger and improve. But does a child ever really fully understand the mother? Did I fully understand my mother? No, I didn't. I doubt if any child ever fully understands their mother. In fact, it's a complicated thing. But that's kind of the analogy I use. I think that God is something that we can have a relationship with. And I think God will give us a lot of things that we need. Sometimes there are things we like and are pleasant, and sometimes they're not. And we don't understand it. I don't think any human being can really understand God. There's so much to it. Now, the word prove means, to me, means demonstrate the truth of something based on the best evidence that we have and based on whatever assumptions we make and how we interpret the evidence. That, to me, is what proof means. And it's kind of what mathematics is about, proving things based on assumptions and so on. Now, science, that word, is our understanding, the best we can have at this point in time, of the world we live in. And this is based on some evidence that we've collected and observed, and on some interpretation we've made of it, and a math model that we've built usually to try to explain it. Now, a fact of life today, in the 20th century and even now in the 21st century, an awful lot of scientists came to believe that science has somehow proven that there's no such thing as God. Many scientists believe, well, there's a physical universe, it's governed by natural laws that we think we understand, and that this physical world has somehow, through these natural law processes, has produced life that we know it. And they believe that. That's a belief. And I think of it as their religion. And in fact, it's got a name. It's called atheism. Some scientists water it down and call it agnosticism, but atheism basically denies the existence of God or anything like that. Everything is just physical and natural. In fact, they've developed something they call the theory of evolution, which they think demonstrates this above statement. They think that, well, life is nothing but a bunch of physical processes, obeying the physical laws which we understand, and that all life is developed that way. And they, as I said, have a religion I call atheism, and probably the most famous one today maybe is Richard Dawkins. And you've probably heard of him and maybe read some of his books, but there's lots of them. He's not by himself by any means. Now, the word hubris means excessive pride or self-confidence, and hubris can create what I call ignorance of truth, even the reluctance to try to pursue truth, or to admit also that we are ignorant. And I think that those scientists like Dawkins are guilty of that. We all are to some extent, no doubt. But in any event, as I said, I think a lot of scientists believe that science proves that God does not exist. And my answer to that, from a math viewpoint, is that's wrong. Absolutely wrong. Now, you might say, well, how can you say that? Why? You just believe something different. You have, well, and by the way, none of these proofs are going to be based on the Bible or any other religious work. A lot of people try to argue with scientists based on what they understand from the Bible, let's say, or some other religious work. And of course, that doesn't work because the scientists deny it. They say, well, that's just nonsense. That's some stories, it's myths, it doesn't mean anything. So these proofs have nothing to do with the Bible, nothing to do with Christianity, nothing to do with Islam, nothing to do with any religion. They're based on math, and there's two of them. Now, before I tell you what they are, let's make sure we understand what we mean. First of all, what is math? Well, math is short for the word mathematics. And if you studied math with me, you'll know what it really is. It's a collection of what are called axiomatic systems. Now, axioms are assumptions that you make, and then you use logic to prove statements based on those assumptions, those axioms, and those are called theorems. And all mathematics today is based on axiomatic systems. And by the way, they even are based on what are called undefined terms, and they have to be given definitions extensively, but let's not get into that. But the bottom line is there's lots of axiomatic systems now. I say a bunch of them, lots and lots and lots of them. In fact, we're creating new axiomatic systems all the time, but we have a big collection of them we've collected over the last centuries. Now, in one axiomatic system that you're familiar with and you use all the time called the natural number system, if I told you what is 2 plus 3, those two numbers, you'd say it's 5. And that is true in that axiomatic system, probably the one you're familiar with. But I'll tell you this, there's two other axiomatic systems that are equally valid math. And in one of the systems, the answer 2 plus 3 equals 0. And in the other one, the answer is 2 plus 3 equals 1. Two different axiomatic systems, just as good as the one you're familiar with and that you use all the time. All three of these axiomatic systems are valid math. As a matter of fact, the one where the answer is 0 is actually a very important axiomatic system that has applications, believe it or not. And so I won't tell you what it is, but I'm just telling you that that's the case. Now, probably the most famous theorem in mathematics is called the Pythagorean theorem. If you study math with anyone, including me, you run across it. As soon as you begin to study geometry, you learn about the Pythagorean theorem. And that was proven in an axiomatic system called Euclid's geometry, Euclidean geometry, in Euclid's great book. And this is something the Greeks proved way back thousands of years ago. Well, guess what? There are other axiomatic systems equally good where it's not true. In fact, it's not true in any of the non-Euclidean geometries, and there's an infinite number of them. There's an infinite number of axiomatic systems where this isn't true. In fact, we live in one of them. The actual geometry of the surface of the Earth, and I talk about this in other videos, the Pythagorean theorem is not true. It's only true in flat surfaces. Okay. Well, in any event, mathematics is a universal language that is used to create math models for these various science theories. And in my review video, I start and tell you how it started with Galileo and Newton in the 1600s and came forward. Any science theory is based on some math model, and it describes some phenomena you're interested in. And a science theory is considered valid if it explains experiments and observations. And as I said, science consists of a bunch of science theories, a lot of science theories out there. And I talk about that in my review video if you haven't watched it. Okay, so now the question is, well, if what you're saying, Dr. Dell, is true, where does science go wrong? Why Where did it go wrong? Well, here's something science did back in 1905. There was an assumption that was made, an implicit assumption actually, that the only stuff that there is physical stuff. And we know that physical stuff cannot travel faster than the speed of light. Einstein came up with that in 1905 in his first theory of relativity called special relativity theory. And Einstein assumed that that's all there was in the world, physical stuff, and nothing can travel faster than the speed of light, and that's it. And everybody bought into it because Einstein's theory is fabulous for proving a lot of things that Newton's theory got wrong. And it's a very, very, very good theory for lots and lots of phenomena. But like I said, it assumed the only thing that we exists is physical. And by the way, the only thing that we can easily perceive with our classical instrumentation is physical stuff. Well, later, as I told in my review, relativity theory then, a little later on, they developed something called quantum theory. It's a very different theory, completely, totally different. And because of this impact of Einstein, the people that developed the quantum theory also assumed nothing travels faster than the speed of light. So they created math models to describe what are called quantum phenomena. And it was very difficult to not assume there were things faster than the speed of light. A guy named de Broglie did, but basically got ignored. There's something called Bell's theorem. That's to do with entanglement. I won't get into the details of it, but again, it's like, wait a minute. In fact, Einstein was so upset with quantum theory because it was predicting what he calls spooky action at a distance, which meant something was happening faster than the speed of light. No, that can't be. And he spent the rest of his life trying to somehow disprove that, debunk that. And he failed, by the way. As successful as he was, as great as he was, in the last decades of his life, he failed at his mission of showing that that quantum theory, there was something wrong with it. So here we are today. We have two famous theories, relativity theory, quantum theory. There's a problem we have today. Now this is 2020, 2021, early 2021. Actually, I'm right at the end of 2020. Big embarrassing problem. These two theories contradict each other. In certain critical situations, they contradict each other. And they don't know what to do about it. Scientists today are in a quandary. What do we do? This contradiction. So they're trying to come up with some deeper theory. They like to call it the theory of everything or something like that somehow resolves this. They haven't done it yet. And they've been working on it for decades. This contradiction was known a long time ago, many decades ago. And for decades and decades, they fought with it, and they can't, and it isn't solved today. Now, why? Well, I believe, and I'll tell you why in a minute, because of another great scientist that you heard me talking in the other video about. The bad assumption they made was Einstein's assumption that there's no stuff that's non-physical and travels faster than the speed of light. That's a no-no. That's just, that's an assumption, by the way. That's an assumption. They haven't proven it. There's no proof of that. It's an assumption that our theories are based on. Now, as I told you in the other review video, today there's something they've observed based on gravitational movement of galaxies and things called dark matter, but they don't know what it is. One of the great modern scientists said they call it dark gravity because they don't know what causes it. They think it's some kind of matter that they can't detect, but they can't prove it. There's another thing called dark energy. In fact, all the physical stuff that we know about, the physical stuff that you and I are made of, atoms, they estimate only constitutes 5% of the universe. 95% is this other stuff, dark matter, dark energy, whatever it is, and they don't know. Now, I believe, as I've already said, the bad assumption was that there is stuff that is non-physical. Travels faster than the speed of light. Completely different thing. And I think that was their big problem. Quantum theory, by the way, is so non-intuitive. The model works to approve experiments, but the model is so unbelievable that the great Richard Feynman, who won his Nobel Prize came up with a way to calculate things with quantum electrodynamics, QED. He said in lectures, I don't understand it. It works, but don't try to ask me how this model actually is manifested in reality. It looks very contradictory. It's quite, the double slit experiment is something that it's true, and we have a model for it. We can predict it even. We don't understand it in some reasonable sense. In fact, Feynman was very skeptical about some of the math models that were being used, and he talks about that frequently. Well, it turns out this isn't me coming up with some new physics. There's a great scientist in the 20th century that I told you about in my review named Dr. William Tiller. And I consider him the modern Galileo. I think that he is, I think he's about 90 years old today. He's still going strong. He has a thing called the TillerFoundation.org. Now, he started out as a mainstream scientist, and he ended up at Stanford chairman of material science department for many years. And then he was a professor, and he published hundreds of papers on classical material science. But in the models he had to construct, the very sophisticated models, he was able to say, hey, wait a minute, if there is a non-physical part of our universe, here's a model for it. And he learned that from the material, and he had worked for some other people. And then here's the really great news with Tiller. And you read his books and his white papers. And by the way, this is not trivial reading. This is deep stuff. This is not trivial. If you're at the high school level, even a little beyond, it's not easy to read these papers. But I'm telling you about them because this is where we are today. First of all, here's a great thing. Tiller has done a series of experiments that prove that there's phenomena that are not explainable by conventional science, by quantum theory or relativity theory. He has experiments to prove it. It involves consciousness, because in Tiller's model, Tiller believes, and I think he's right, there's two parts to you. You have a physical body, but you have a non-physical body superimposed on it that you're clearly not in some sense aware of, but it's really what makes you. I think that's where consciousness resides. That's where what we call the spirit or the soul resides. And by the way, that's where the afterlife then is, in the non-physical universe. And by the way, time and distance have no meaning in the non-physical universe. It's a very different type of universe, and we don't understand it very well. We have a model. I think Tiller's model is easier to understand than quantum theory model that Feynman complains about. I think I can understand the Tiller model better. Now, it's not intuitive, but it's based on some things in regular science. I think I can understand it. Tiller's he's gone further with other scientists, where he's created a math model which has the physical world and the non-physical world as what are called reciprocal spaces, and interaction, and how they interact with something he called deltrons, and so on. Now, it turns out that this non-physical model of Tiller's explains all sorts of paranormal phenomena that we've observed over the years, and most traditional science denies it. They say, no, couldn't have happened. They don't believe it. They tend to ignore things that their models don't prove. They don't ignore dark matter and dark energy. They haven't been able to ignore that because their physical models just make it so clear, but they can't explain it. Well, then there's a lot of other phenomena. And I talk about that in some of my other videos, about how I belief, for example, consciousness is extremely important in your life, and what you believe is important, and it works in mysterious ways. So anyway, I think it's this non-physical part of the universe where what we call God, which we don't think we understand it very well, we're aware of it. God is, in some sense of the word, causing things to happen. And I think if you live your life, I've talked about this in other places, and invest in yourself, believe in yourself, if you have certain beliefs and then you behave in certain ways. Those beliefs will cause certain behaviors. Things will happen. You'll take advantage of things, and you'll have a great life. It depends on what you believe in. It can be great, it can be horrible. If you believe in bad things, it'll be bad things. In this non-physical universe, time doesn't have any meaning. It's where I believe consciousness resides. And by the way, there's new physical theories today about topological qubits in microtubules in the neurons that the great scientist Penrose has worked with the great anesthesiologist Hameroff to come up, and none of the physicists today, none of the mainstream science understands this. I believe that's probably how our physical body is interacting with the non-physical body. And again, I can't prove this. This is an idea I've got based on what I currently can kind of understand. And it makes a lot of sense. It glues together very well. Now, as I said earlier, mainstream scientists deny the existence of the non-physical part. They ignore Tiller by and large. He's not like Galileo. He hasn't been put in jail or anything. He publishes his stuff. I'm hoping that enough people will start understanding it, looking at his experiments, looking at his models, more experiments. We're just at the beginning of it. We're just beginning. When Maxwell did his equation of electrics and magnetism, we were just at the beginning of understanding modern electrical phenomena, and then on and on. Anyway, that's Tiller. And that's one of the so-called proofs I have. I think that Tiller has convinced me that there is a lot more to the world than our physical models acknowledge. And I believe that in the non-physical world, and I think that's what, I don't think the physical world, by the way, could exist without it. It wouldn't surprise me if dark matter is a result of things in the non-physical world. Dark energy might be the same thing. We don't know yet. We're at the very early stages of understanding this. We're kind of where Galileo was when science was just really at that level, getting into the next level. We're waiting now for our Newton or our Einstein to come along, and Tiller, maybe he's Galileo, and then we need the next guy. Okay, now, the second proof of God's existence. I call it proof, put it in quotes, right? It's in quotes, proof. This is what mathematicians call a reductio ad absurdum proof. And what that means is we're going to show that the assumption that, well, watch and see. We're going to basically get a contradiction to the assumption that life just originated from physical processes. People say today, life started just from ordinary physical processes. We understand the physical processes. We know all about, because of Einstein and quantum theory, we know all about chemistry and physics and all, and we do. I think we have a very good understanding of the physical stuff. It's the non-physical we don't. Okay. So we believe that life just originated with physical processes. Well, here's a fact of life. The simplest life form we know, life being something that can reproduce itself, is a cell. Okay? Now, here's what we've learned in the recent decades. The cell is an extremely complex, call it factory. The cell is extremely complex. We know a lot about it now, and there's a lot we still don't know. There's a lot of things we don't understand about how this thing works, but it's extremely complex. And the idea that somehow molecules randomly came together and created this thing using some kind of evolutionary processes, in my opinion, if you look at the probability of that happening, the probability of that is zero. And if it's zero, then that means it didn't happen. Well, if it didn't happen through natural processes, then how did it happen? We don't have any math model or any set of experiments today that in any sense of the word validate that somehow life arose spontaneously. We don't know how it arose. We don't know. But it is so complicated that it's reasonable to say that something that we would call intelligent, and by the way, a lot more intelligent than we are, meaning more knowledgeable. Intelligence is not only the ability to solve problems, it's knowledge, it's knowing things. Something that understands a lot of things we don't yet know did this. Some people call it intelligent design. I don't know. I think you could think of it that way. Something did this. So where'd it come from? What we just don't know is the truth of the matter. And so whatever this something is that caused it, and by the way, the proof is the probability of zero that it happened at random. Now, I've always believed this for a long time, but there's a guy named James Tour, The Mystery of the Origin of Life. And he has a wonderful YouTube video that I've given you a link to here, and you ought to go watch it. Because he is a great scientist. I'm talking traditional chemist. And he points out how extremely complicated these processes are to create even simple parts of the life. We today don't have any technology that can even begin to create life in any sense of the word. Yes, it's true. If you mix certain chemicals together, you might get some amino acids, which are the building blocks of protein. Yeah, that's true. So what? That's like if this is where life is, and this is where you start making a few basic chemicals that go into it, the gap is insurmountable. The fact that somehow these all assembled, I mean, James Tour video is convincing. Now, none of this argument I'm giving in this video has anything to do with the Bible or the Quran or the Upanishadic, any religious writing of any kind. There's nothing to do with religion. And that's the problem, by the way, that people get into when they get into this intelligent design. They try to prove something with quotes from the Bible. You'll never convince any scientist with any quote from any religious document. That's just fictitious. That's a story. And since it is a story, it's not modern science. That is true. So that's why I'm saying math, because math is the building block of science. Math models is what makes science. And then these models make these predictions and let us understand phenomena. Well, we don't have any math models today that even remotely show how life could originate. Now, I might also say that once there is life, there is something called evolution. I mean, we've had, for example, intelligent design. We took wolves and made dogs out of them, all different breeds of dogs. That was human beings intelligently through breeding, okay, evolving from wolves into dogs. And we've done that with all kinds of domesticated animals. And by the way, there's a lot of wild animals that we can't figure out how to domesticate them, only a small number. If you read Guns, Germs, and Steel, for example, that book. So yeah, there is evolution. However, does that explain all the different species? And you look at the Cambrian Revolution, and a guy named Berlinski, for example, as one example, talks a lot about that. And quite frankly, I think that there was a lot more to life forms being created than it can be explained by what I call the standard theories of evolution. That's another story. But let's assume I'm wrong on that. Although no one, I've, to the extent that I've studied it, and I'm a math guy, I'm not a scientist, so I'm trying to study it from that viewpoint. To the extent that I've studied it and looked at both sides of it, I cannot see, for example, I can't see any path where the whale evolved from whatever it was. There's people claim they got it, but that's not true. I've seen people that, so who knows what happened, but that's another story. I just go back to where did life originate from? A single cell. Where'd it come from? And if some scientist can come along and give me any kind of convincing scientific proof that it was a purely random type physical process, or maybe not even maybe there's something in natural laws we don't understand yet, fine and dandy. I'm always willing to change my opinion. That's where I stand today. The other thing, of course, I believe is I have a great belief in consciousness being able to do things that are not understandable. And I've put that in other things, videos I've done and so on for you. about beliefs. I think your belief system is extremely important. And of course, it's not what you desire, by the way, it's what you believe. And I've got other videos on that. So these are my two proofs, if you want to call them that. It's certainly, and by the way, when I was a young man, I became almost atheistic in my belief. When I first started studying science and everything, I thought, well, I believed what they were telling me, and well, where could God fit into any of this? It wasn't really, quite frankly. Tiller was what really got me going on it, the great scientist Tiller. And I would defy anybody today to study Tiller and say, well, he's wrong and this other's right. Okay, so anyway, that's it. Math proves God exists in two different what I call proofs. And I'm sure there's more, but that's the ones I got. And so I will let that video go at that. And by the way, if you want to start learning the math, as you very well know, I recommend you go to my website, craighane.com, and see what I can begin to help teach you math. Depends on who you are, what you want to do in life, and so on and so forth. That's complicated. This isn't it's not a sales pitch on that. It's just me just telling you that you might want to go to my website and get a lot of information and do that. So what I'll do is I will say due to you there and invite you to go to my website at craighane.com. And I hope you have a great life. And I hope that this video and its companion video, if you needed it, maybe help you a little bit in maybe clarifying your thinking on the situation we all live in. Okay? So I will see you on another video sometime.